Welcome, everyone. You're listening to the ImPerfect Podcast. I'm Kathy.
And I'm Kennedy. Join us on this week's episode as we discuss intriguing topics and people of interest that will inspire us to explore all of the unique pieces of ourselves.
We are all imperfectly perfect.
We're glad you're here. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the ImPerfect Podcast. So, for the most part, people must think that they have pretty good control and awareness of their thoughts and decisions, but what if there was more going on behind the scenes than we'd like to admit or realize?
Although this is a broad topic that we're going to talk about today, and it sounds like we could be leading into many different avenues with the term subconscious mind, we're just going to focus on mind traps that exist for today's show, which include biases, phenomenon, and fallacies.
And these things are what are considered to be hardwired into our human minds, and you may not, for the majority of your life, even be aware or introduced to these thinking errors and mental shortcuts. But today we're going to disrupt your peace. Awareness, check.
Right. So being made aware that these mind traps exist can help us better navigate our life and help us make more rational decisions sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes if we want to pay attention to them. And before we continue, our source for today's episode comes from Escaping Ordinary, which is also influenced heavily by psychologist Daniel Kahneman, I believe his name is pronounced, and his writings from his book, Thinking Fast and Slow.
So the first thing we're going to talk about
Mental trap, yeah.
Mental trap. We're going to talk about, I was mentally trapped there for a moment. I can come up with the word. The first mental trap is survivorship bias. So what that is when we're only presented with data where the subset of the population has already survived some process. So it's sort of like the image of the iceberg that we've all seen out there, and the top of the iceberg, the top that's above the water is the only part that we see in any given circumstance. But other things in our life, like projects we've been working on or stresses at home or those sorts of things, are under the water, and we fail to see those parts of the under the water iceberg. And a lot of times those can be failed attempts or disappointments in life.
Yeah, so in this bias specifically, we're only focusing on the things that survived or surfaced, so to speak, in terms of the iceberg. So I know I've seen it on Facebook before. It's that image of, you see just the tip of the iceberg, literally, and it shows, whatever context you're talking about, a successful business. Okay, you got all these different categorizations and and that's what everybody sees. But what they fail to see is all of the beneath the water of failed attempts and things that didn't go the way that you expected them to. So it's only the things that survived the process or the life circumstance. Whether it being oblivious or like we're just oblivious or ignorant to the parts that had not surpassed the surface, I guess.
Another great example of this is if you move to a new town and see lots of new restaurants in the area and they're all successful, you start thinking about, hey, I could pull this off too, and how likely it would be for you to succeed in such a massively successful area, because all you're seeing is the successes. But you're kind of being ignorant to the fact that you're not seeing perhaps the hundreds of previously failed restaurants or other small businesses that haven't worked, that came in before these ones, or maybe before you arrived on the scene.
And when we are only focusing on the winners, survivorship bias causes you to overestimate your chances of success. So have you ever tried actually Googling, and I actually did, just to kind of like prove the point to myself, you should try Googling actors that never made it. or people that failed and dropped out of college. We don't focus on these things, obviously, because there's nothing.
Nobody's signing up to have their name on that one.
Right. There's nothing notable there, nothing that you necessarily want to see or want your name to be on, like Mom said. So, but that creates this survivorship bias of we only see the outcomes. We don't see the build up of that end goal or whatever it is.
Yeah. So this can be, sounding a little harsh. We aren't saying that you shouldn't chase your dreams, because you should, but there needs to be a layer of awareness there that makes you see the whole picture, as opposed to just the part that, the focusing on just the good. I think we're supposed to just focus on the good, but not in this circumstance. So
Right.
next.
I hear what you're saying, at least. So the next one is self-serving bias and fundamental attribution error. That's a tongue twister. It's the belief that our failures are due to external forces and our successes are due to our own internal actions. So as an example, you receive an A on your test and it's because of your hard work and studying, versus if you fail a test, it's because the teacher was being unfair when they were marking or they were being too harsh in grading.
Yeah, I think you have to maintain a level of accountability there, even in your failures and in getting feedback from other people. Even, it's good to focus on your strengths and your weaknesses. That can be helpful in combating this bias.
Right. It's like a second set of eyes, I guess, in certain
Yeah,
circumstances.
you can't just take the good out and go, yeah, I aced that test because I worked so hard. But then meanwhile, everyone you fail, it's like, oh, well, it was noisy. And
I studied hard. The teacher's just being whatever. Meanwhile, internally, you're like, I totally didn't study. Like,
right.
so this bias is also closely related to fundamental attribution error. So we judge others' behaviors on their personality or fundamental characteristics, but we attribute our own behavior to situational factors. So, as an example, if someone's late to work, it's because they're lazy or they don't wake up early enough. But if it's you, it's because, oh, there's traffic or there was snow on the roads.
I find it's interesting when you were mentioning about this. I thought sometimes I do that, but almost in favor of the other person. I find myself looking for, well, maybe it was because they, got in a fight before they left the house. Maybe it
Hmm.
was, and sometimes I err almost on too much on that side and give a little bit too much, maybe.
Oh, really?
Mm.
It's a different perspective. Yeah, no, for me, I definitely have experienced the times where I'm like, you want to see the best in yourself, but you can't see from other people's perspectives a lot of the time.
Yeah. I'm
Mm.
not saying I do it every time. I'm
Oh,
sure.
okay. Well, in that case, sure, I've probably had my moments, but I think in generalized terms, the majority is probably that I'm not willing to, not that I'm not willing, but that I have a harder time seeing from their perspective.
Yeah, I find it's a lot of that has come with age, just being a little more gracious.
Mm.
So the next one, hindsight bias. So we've probably all met someone who always likes to say things like, I knew they were going to break up and I knew he was going to lose that election, stuff like that. Like the people that are like the I told you type of people.
Mm. So it's easy to be an expert and an all-knowing of something, that's going to happen when it's already happened and they're already past events leading up to, um, what it can be looked upon. So the hindsight bias is also, it can be a memory distorter. And what we mean by that is that memories of what you actually said or believed before a certain event, can be distorted to make your current opinions or beliefs more in line with what actually transpired. So it just makes you look like the know-all person in situations.
And here's a real shocker. It's always distorted to be in your favor.
Well, right. Because why would we distort it to not be in our favor?
Right. When you said a distorter, I was like, it's a memory disorder or a distorter in you.
Distorter, yeah.
So it distorts your memory, the way of how things really went down, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this can also cause people to distort or misremember their past opinions or things they said, and it makes them overconfident in how they perceive something happening.
Yeah, and it's easy to put the blame on someone after the fact of something happening, when all the cards are on the table, when in reality, really the whole process was unpredictable in the same way that, oh, I knew they were going to break up.
Yeah.
Did you
So
say
basically,
anything in the past that would have made you say that you thought they were going to break up? Well, no. Oh, I was just thinking it. And now because it's out and all the cards are on the table, well, I knew that the whole time.
so it's just like reading the conclusion of a book.
Right. Right.
Right. So it's easy to get in a loop of how could I be so stupid or why didn't I see this coming? When in reality, you made the soundest decision with the information you had available at the moment and time you were in the circumstance. And you couldn't necessarily do anything to prevent it at the time.
Right. So it's kind of the flip side where it's like you also have to be kind to yourself, that don't be like, oh, I'm so stupid.
Right. Or listen to the people that are like, oh, I know what's going to happen.
Right. Because that can be harsh too, sometimes hearing that from people. And it's like, how was I so oblivious to the fact that all these people saw it coming? Well, no, all the cards are on the table and now they see that it happened and they're like, well, yeah, obviously. And then you feel like an idiot.
Right. So the next bias we have is the availability bias. If someone were to say, for example, my uncle smoked for 50 years and he's still alive, so smoking isn't bad for you. Like, I mean, I think we're all past that right now. Like,
Right. Do we really believe that?
you wouldn't necessarily believe how they gathered their data in that circumstance. So
Right.
we're horrible at thinking statistically, even when we're educated, and we tend to create a picture of the world using the examples that most easily come to mind.
Yeah, and this is illogical and not in line with reality a lot of the time. So we use statements like these to try and prove something, but they actually prove nothing at all. Like, where's the data? Your uncle smoking for 50 years, and that's must mean that smoking's not bad. Well, no, where's the data? Another example of that would be being able to recall flights that were unsafe or that crashed. So we don't recall of the safe or the good flights, the ones that all made it, because the majority do, right? So the availability bias creates a fear of flying in this particular case because you're focusing on the 5 bad flights in the last 10 years or whatever. So
Right, but
you're scared of flying.
it's just a small piece of the whole picture, really. The information that's readily available right there in your memory because it's been highlighted on the news, and nobody talks, like you said, of the million flights that landed safely, only but the one that crashed in the ocean, right? So our memory is just a small piece of everything involved.
Yeah. And additionally, the closer in proximity that you are to the available information, the higher you can perceive a risk of something too. So a really good example of that is your risk of being attacked by a shark is actually 1 in 1 million. But if your cousin was attacked by a shark last year, your friend was this year, and you witnessed another attack on the beach, your perceived risk is higher in your own mind when in reality, it's still only 1 in 1 million chance.
I think I would not be going in the water.
Right. But that's the thing. Anyway, he must be thinking, oh, it's all around me. Right. But that's the whole point.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, when it's close to home, it hits harder, I guess, is the
Yeah,
thing.
absolutely. It's the same as, well, no, that wouldn't be such a good example. I was going to say certain um, illnesses within a family, but that's more genetics and we won't go down that road. But I was just going to say when it's there.
But not today.
What's that?
Maybe we will someday, but not today.
Right, right. So the next one is availability cascade. This is a self-sustaining chain of events, which may start from media reports of a relatively minor event and lead up to mainstream public panic or large scale government intervention. So a lot of big words there. But as an example, let's say there was a local news story about a razor blade being found in candy.
Yeah.
It would then lead to parents becoming worried, obviously, and then it could lead to a news story about parents being worried. It could then maybe, because it's a lot of local stories, it could then become a national story. And then it could be parents nationwide checking their children's Halloween candy because of this fear. And it could lead to homemade candy or cakes not being handed out to trick-or-treaters nationwide. And it all started because there was one razor blade maybe found in one small town in one piece of candy, and who knows what the source of that was, but it's created this mass panic. So it
And
creates this availability cascade of what information is there in front of you.
I think something we didn't find with our information is how hard those ones stick. Because I think of the couple times in my life that, and Halloween's a perfect example, oh, so and so. And a lot of times it wasn't even somebody you knew, it's somebody who told somebody, and it was probably a rumor from somebody made up or
Mm,
from 12 years ago. And even now, like you look at, of course, parents don't want anything awful to happen to their kids. So, I always look through your guys' streets. And if you got an apple from someone or a Rice Krispie square or what have you, unless the parent, well, this is the measure I used. I only took you to, houses that I felt were safe anyway. But unless I could make the connection in my mind, oh yeah, so and so gave you that apple because a lot of apples weren't given out, then I started to worry, like, oh, where did this come from? And maybe somebody snuck it in this, like not just say that I was, delusional or paranoid at night or anything, but it did put the question. And then that little, the razor blade fear creeps in that from a story I heard maybe when I was 6, and it maybe wasn't true then either.
right. And I mean, there's nothing saying that you can't be cautious and things like that, because I mean, we do live in a different world now with lots of things going on all the time, but it's just a good example to put into perspective about how something so small can become so overinflated at times, out of nowhere.
Yeah. People begin to adopt a belief, not necessarily because it's true, but yeah, it's just because
Because
it,
it's popular sometimes. And when you are watching the news, it's important to look at the fact, is it an objective piece of journalism or just an availability cascade? So this specific topic.
that is a lot to think about, I guess.
Yeah,
Have to measure every piece of information going in, right?
right.
So the next thing we have is sunk cost fallacy. And so what that is when we think cost, we often think of money. So, which does work as an example here. Let's say you go to the movies and you realize it sucks
Mm,
within 10 minutes. Like, what am I doing here? I don't know if I'll be able to sit through the whole thing, but you decide to stay because you already spent the money.
right. So that's a blatantly obvious example. Another one would be that you're staying in a relationship with someone simply because the time and the effort is already there, and you don't want to have that quote unquote sunk cost, so to speak, by leaving if you are having the thoughts of leaving.
Yeah. And that, I guess, really could apply to a lot of different things. Like,
A job, the sunk
well,
cost in time, you know, 15 years of senior in the business, and you don't want to lose that seniority there.
right, or the clothes that, you bought, but they're older, they're not suitable, they don't fit right. Somebody gave them to you, and I don't know if it's as common in your generation, but I know for me, and I think it would be more common in my generation, but even more so going back through the years, you didn't dare throw at anything that might have a use for what it was intended to or something else. So I
Mm,
know you grew up in my home, so you probably got a little bit of that. How many times can I use this milk bag?
right, exactly. And to be more rational in times like these, with the sunk cost fallacy, it's important to look at the current state of things, that you are weighing the sunk cost amount rather than the past. So the movies, what is the current situation? Well, I hate the movie. Why don't we talk about the sunk cost of your time? Right? And the same thing in the relationship. Like, screw the $10 of the movie, screw the 3 years in the relationship. If you're not happy or if you hate the movie, so you need to look at present stuff more than the past.
For sure. The next one really intrigued me. It's called the framing effect. And it talks about how our minds work in terms of math percentages. So if you were given an option to buy a meat that was 99% fat-free or a meat that was only 1% fat, most people would go for 99% fat-free, even though really they're the exact same.
Interesting.
So if given 98% versus 1%, most people would pick the 98%. What do you think that is?
I don't know. It's the same as I think I heard once with pricing, that people tend to grab things that are $4.99 instead of $5.
Yeah, the 99, and I don't know, one of the big chains doesn't use 99. I think it's 97 or 98.
Right. Yeah, I noticed that at Walmart actually the other day.
I was trying to say it, but okay. Yeah, good. Yeah.
Anyway, we often draw different conclusions from the same things depending solely on how they're presented to us. And a lot of companies will use this as a marketing strategy. It's all psychology. So it's all in how you frame things. There's in a different situation, there's a 90% chance you will survive this operation. That's good odds. Or there is a 10% chance you will die from this operation. Even though that's the same thing, like, which one would you rather hear, right?
I'm thinking that that's a little more harsh, not something I'd want to hear going into
Right.
an operation. Yeah. So next one up is clustering illusion. I've done this myself. So have you ever seen faces in the clouds, or some people see faces in their burnt toast, or, Mother Mary, what have you? The human brain's always trying to seek patterns and rules in everything. It's harmless, but it can have real world implications.
Yeah, like when you are trying to make sense of what you perceive to be a pattern. So a bad situation would be, why do bad things keep happening to me? Is this just a by chance situation, or is this actually the clustering illusion?
So I never get things right.
Right. And if that's a whole other topic, if that's a belief of yours. Anyway.
Yeah, but it's easy to cluster things together, especially, I mean, we've all had those days you get up and starts like every other morning, but then, you trip or you keep dropping stuff or whatever, and that's annoying. But then,
it's because it's Monday, right?
right. And so then that's fine. You let it go, and then the next thing you know, you're on the way to your car and you drop your car keys under the car. And you're like,
you spill the coffee down the front of you, and then your car won't start.
Yeah, it's like compound frustration, basically. And
yeah,
it'd be very easy to cluster those together.
Absolutely. So the next one is exponential growth. So linear growth is intuitive to us. Exponential growth, however, is incomprehensible. So again, words. So an example of that is, if you were to fold a piece of paper 50 times, how thick do you think it would be?
I can't get my mind around this.
Right. And so everybody goes, well, a few inches thick. And that is actually wrong. It would be so thick that it would nearly reach the sun.
I'm gonna have to try that and get back to you.
You're gonna send me a picture of this piece of paper folded 50 times. I know I can't.
Has anyone proven this?
Hey, it's the source I got it from. So I don't know if someone wants to try it, and maybe we can have a contest on the podcast. I don't know. But Albert Einstein did say that the power of compounding is the most powerful force in the universe. And so in the same way, if you were to put $1 aside today, $2 tomorrow, $4 the next day, and you continue to double the amount each day, once you get to 64 days, in your head, you're like, oh, I have a couple $100, 18 quintillion dollars. I cannot fathom. I don't.
What's a quintillion?
Who knows? Too much that I can't even understand.
Yeah, that's a good illustration of how small things can grow exponentially.
Yeah. And the world is full of uncertainties and complexities, but there is some math and trust behind some of these things. So the point in this is to attempt to be more intuitive in your choices and do not underestimate compound growth.
Okay. Barnum effect. It's our next title we have here.
Our last one too.
When we easily attribute our personalities to vague and generalized statements, even if they can apply to a wide range of people. So a good example of this would be horoscopes. You know, just because I'm a Sagittarius doesn't mean that I'm like identical to every other Sagittarius in the world. And I'm not saying that some of the things in the write-up might not hit home or make sense to you and every other Sagittarius, but I've often thought, I used to read the horoscopes when I would get the paper, and I think that sounds like one I read a while ago, and then I'd start reading the other ones. Gemini. Well,
that one applies. Yeah, right. They all make sense, right? And I think that's the point of the Barnum effect, is that
it's like the fortune cookie. Anybody could get their fortune cookie, and it
would make sense.
We will meet a new friend today. Oh, good. Or think twice before you invest money with family or whatever.
Right.
Because it could apply across the board.
It's very generalized is the point. Yeah. So the message for today is we don't know anything, apparently. And everything is an illusion. But seriously, so much in our subconscious mind, involving biases and things like that. For the most part, we're unaware of these things in our day-to-day lives. It's hardwired.
Yeah. And sometimes just being aware of the concepts is the first step in becoming more, self-aware of what might be going on behind the scenes. So, use this information to benefit your life in the new year, maybe,
Yeah, and sorry to disturb your peace, but it's all about just overall growth and learning more about ourselves. A lot of things that we don't know, and every day we learn new things about our body and our minds and how we work as human beings. So we just thought this topic was super interesting, and we're all aware of biases and things like that. But when it's presented in this way, I find there's just so much that it's like, oh, damn, like, yeah, I didn't think of it in that way,
Yep. So good topic, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah.
If you or someone you know has a unique story to tell, we'd love to hear from you. Email us at theimperfectpodcast@outlook.com.
For more information and how to connect with us on social media, you can visit us at our website, theimperfectpodcast.ca.
And from whichever platform you are listening to this episode, be sure to like, share, and leave us a review. We would really appreciate your feedback. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode.
We look forward to hearing your feedback and seeing you all find that extra joy and embrace your own imperfect.
See you next week.